Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Twin Talks. Today we are talking All for the Game, or specifically The Foxhole Court, which is the first book in the All for the Game series, and it's by far one of my favorite books that I've read in recent times.
I'm gonna go so far as to say it's one of my favorite books that I've read in recent times, but I do quite enjoy it. The series itself is really good. There's three of them, I
Yes,
think.
yes,
Yeah.
there's three books. They're all relatively short. I think the last book is maybe like 350 pages at most.
And they're self-published, so they're not available in stores.
Um, and the author is Nora Sakovic. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm probably not. But she's a quirky kind of character, and she was active on Tumblr for a long time, which says a lot about this series when you think about it.
It's a cult classic on
It's a
Tumblr.
Tumblr cult classic.
Um, which is actually it's how I found it. I was trolling the forums on Tumblr. Just kidding. I just exist on Tumblr, and a bunch of people were reblogging about it and stuff. And so I looked, and it was for free or 99 cents. So I bought it and I read it, and I originally was not super pleased with it. In that I stopped reading it, but that's not unusual for me. A very short attention span.
Yep.
So I read the first, I want to say maybe 50 pages and just left it for I think a year at least. And then I finished the first one, second, and third all on an airplane to New York City.
What made you pick it up again?
I don't know. I think I downloaded them all onto my Nook and I brought my Nook onto the airplane with me. And I slept for a little while. And then I woke up and I was like, I'm going to read this book now. And I read them all right then and there. That doesn't often happen to me anymore. I don't binge read like I used to. But that one I did all within a day. So
Well, they're short enough to read in a day. Because I know you gave, or you told me about those books not too long after you read them, I believe.
uh-huh.
And then you're like, oh, they're like $1 on Amazon for each one. I'm like, okay, fuck it. I'll get it. I'm in between books. So I bought all three the same day. And then I read them at work, during my lunch hours, with sometimes during downtime. And I flew through them. Like, first book was done in it before I got home. The second book I finished halfway by the end of the workday, and then the third book was gone.
I want to say this was what, 2 years ago, 2.5. It was the year we took Cook Myth and Lit.
Was it the year we took Myth and
No, I don't know.
Lit?
I went to New York freshman year. I was 19, spring break.
I'm just trying to think if it's been 2 years since I read the books. I don't think it had.
Maybe I wasn't going to New York. No, I was. That's when I read it. I don't know.
Maybe you waited a little bit before you gave it to me.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's been 2 years, but it's been a while since I've been quote unquote in the fandom.
I'm generally confused now. Genuinely confused.
When were you
I'm
doing book club?
you know, all the years run together. Um, it was not junior year. Well, we might have been first semester junior year. For a timeline, we've known each other for 4 years. We met freshman year
Second
of
second
college.
semester freshman year.
I worked at Barnes and Noble for 2 years. I studied abroad the second semester of our junior year,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah. So there you go. That's life. Uh, so I want to say it was sophomore year then when I introduced them to you, but I don't think that's when I read them.
Maybe. That sounds relatively right. So it has been a while since I've read them. Or rather, you know why it doesn't feel like it's been that long since I've read them? Because I read them again in the time that's passed. Because I think I've read the books 3 times now and 4 times for the first one. Because every time I would get Nancy or Tanya into it, I'd have to reread it so I can follow along with them and see where they're gonna get.
I haven't read a book with a friend outside of you since book club, which was like 2 years ago now, a year and
Mhm.
a half. I'm really bad at book club too, actually. So
You
I was in a
really
book
are.
club at the Barnes and Noble I worked at. We had a store-wide book club where one of my coworkers, her name is Kat, she's amazing and I love her. I should probably text her. I haven't done that. She started this book club. It was a young adult for all ages book club, and so none of us were like teens, but we would all read teen books and then like meet in the bookstore and talk about them. It was 90% consisted of my coworkers, but eventually we got this like mother-daughter duo, and they were precious. And this one girl who eventually had a baby, so she had to stop coming to book club. Her baby is really beautiful. I follow her on Instagram. And then this other girl, whose name I don't remember, but she was also really nice. But for the most part, it was all my coworkers. And we would take turns. We would like have a theme week, or for each month rather. And then, yeah, that's how I've read any teen books in the past years. It's been because of that.
Versus that's usually my preferred genre. Well, I wouldn't. Young adult is definitely one I gravitate towards, but I wouldn't say it's all of my books because I do
Yeah.
have like a lot of quote unquote adult fiction that I read, but
I think
usually
I say
teens
this
fun.
every time now. I literally don't read for fun
Hmm.
anymore. So
Which makes you a sad English major.
it makes me sad English major, but it makes me not hate being an English major because I feel like if all I did was read, I'd want to kill myself. So
See, that's why I differentiate between what I read for fun and what I read for classes, which is why usually I don't touch literature unless I'm in a class, because that's a divide for me. Mine's pure young adult fiction, fantasy, so far out of what we study in class that I can distance myself from it. And the way I talk about literature, I don't have to analyze it or have these like extravagant thoughts like, "Ooh, I really like this character. He's kind of an asshole, but he's funny."
I think that's also what makes you a good writer,
That is true.
which is the skill I don't have. So
I am a writer, and actually, for all of you who don't know, I write fan fiction, um, which I know, warning flagged for some people. I swear I don't write the weird fan fiction you all are afraid of. I mean, I write like there's some sex in my fan fictions, but not even like I wouldn't say it's even half of my works. I wrote a 400-page Bellark fic, which is Bellamy and Clark from the TV show The 100. For those of you who don't know fandom language, um, and that was like most people who don't know fandom language. But that was basically a whole retelling of the show through a modern lens. And there was only one sex.
see, I have this problem where I start things but I don't finish them. And so that's why I can't ever really be in any fandom fully because I don't finish things usually. So I started the 100. I think I'm the one who told you to watch it.
No, we bonded over it because I was watching it and you said you had watched it.
There we go. See, I knew it was something. But I don't think I've watched past the second season.
Which is fine, don't. It gets really complicated. They start killing characters, and it's just a mess, but I'm still here.
And I didn't watch the last, I think, 2 seasons of Teen Wolf. Um, I haven't finished the second season of Queer Eye yet, but I'll come back to it. Sometimes I start things and stop and then come back to them. Sometimes I start things and never come back to them.
I'm like that too. Where certain shows, if I really like it, I'll go back and watch it. It'll be like months past, and sometimes I'm like, like Orange is the New Black. I watched this first 3 seasons religiously when they came out, but then the 4th season came, and I just never started it, and then I just never picked it back up again. But my dad is watching it, and so I'm like, tell me when you get to season 4, because I'll sit and watch it with you.
I keep coming back to Peaky Blinders. I started it maybe this time last year, when I was in England, and I never finished it. I'm on season 3 now. It took me quite a long time to get to season 3. But I know something that happens in season 3. It's a spoiler. Any of you watch Peaky Blinders, I know what happens, which is partially why I haven't finished it yet.
That's actually one of the reasons why I won't go to Orange is the New Black season 4, because I know they kill off one of my favorite characters. And I'm just like, well, you know what? If I don't watch it, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I just want Tommy to be happy. Okay? And I know what happens. And I know he's never going to be happy. But that's whatever.
But back to All for the Game, since we kind of got off track there.
Yeah, we did.
So I guess we should summarize the series for those of you who don't know, or at least the first book.
It's a sports novel.
Take that with a grain of salt, because sports is like this thing that's present in the book, but it's also not the entire book. Because I know my friend Nancy really hates sports books, and I had to like tell her, I'm like, it's not sports as you think it is.
Nancy hates sports.
Are you really surprised by that?
No, but it hurts a little. I like any and all sports. I am a sports fan. It really does. It's not a real sport. It doesn't actually exist in the real world. The sport that's in All for the Game.
It is called it's a bastard of like lacrosse and hockey. I think that's what they say.
Field hockey.
Is it field hockey? I could have swore they said ice hockey.
Well, so as I recall, it's like lacrosse in a closed off rink, sort of. So that's, I think, where it's like ice hockey with the boards and the glass. But other than that, it more resembles field hockey. And it has similar rules to rugby, where you can only take a certain amount of steps before you
have to pass it.
Or like ultimate frisbee is the same way. And yeah, and I think it also has like the violence of rugby, although lacrosse is violent too.
So it's a super violent sport, and the main character, Neil Jostin, is really, really obsessed with the sport. Like, he played it as a kid, but then his mother kind of kidnaps him in a way, like parental kidnap. And they go on the run from his father, who is a not nice man, in, like, the nicest of terms.
I feel like we shouldn't spoil it too much as to what Neil's father does, but
I just said he was a not nice man. I'm not saying what he is, what he does, how he's related to this all, just that he's not nice and they're running from him.
Okay.
And so they're on the run for like something like, I want to say 8 years or so.
Yeah, that's about right, I would say.
And then his mother dies and he's left all alone. And he decides, well, she's not here. I'm going to try out for the sport she told me not to. And so he joins some high school team, and he gets recruited by his former childhood friend, Kevin Day, who is an Exy star.
But doesn't recognize him.
Which, to be fair, he says, it's been 8 years, I look super different, and I'm grown.
And purposely trying to look different.
Yes. And so Neil, you know, not making the smart decision and running away like you would if you were on the run, decides, fuck it, I'm gonna go play this sport with my childhood friend and hope he doesn't recognize me, and when he does, I'll leave. Everything will be fine. Everything is not fine.
But that doesn't happen till later. I'm trying to think of the timeline of the first book. And I think the first book starts mostly with Neil learning the team that he's on.
Yes. So,
go ahead.
what most... the first book is where we kind of differ on opinions. You think it's really slow.
Okay. Having read it again, my problem was that I have ADHD and it's a problem. It's not necessarily that the book is slow. It's that it takes a little while to get to what I was expecting when I picked it up.
That's fair. The first book is mainly build up. It's almost 90% build up for what the whole series is going to be built off of. So it's learning about this sport, this team Neil's on, the people in it, and setting up the drama that's going to happen in the next 2 books, which there's a lot of drama.
Oh boy.
And really, the book needs to happen that way because of how much happens in this. And I think it's I was about to say it's like a good representation, but then I thought about everything that happens to these characters.
I don't think it's well, it's okay, so it's good representation in that any representation is good representation if you think that way. But I don't think it's the best representation of a healthy relationship.
No.
So I'll
Well,
leave that there.
I think the main relationship that we do see develop through the books is a step towards what can be a healthy relationship between two very dysfunctional and unhealthy boys. And it feels like the first step in them getting towards that healthy relationship and having that chance when they thought they were not going to have it.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, a lot of things happened to these boys, like a lot.
Yeah. It didn't even occur to me to like be like, hey, there's things in this book when I recommended it. I think is why I haven't recommended it since, because I felt a little bit bad, just like letting you go blindly towards that. But
You gave me some warning. You're like, man, I really hate this one character, but you never said why. And then I got to that part, I'm like, oh, yeah?
it's kind of dark actually, and it gets dark quickly.
Oh
Um,
no, these books are super dark. Like when you just look at its bare themes and what Neil goes through in his life and what he continues to go through, super dark.
yeah, but there's moments where you sort of forget about it, which I think is why it's such a like an enduring thing on Tumblr. Because there's moments where you like think like this is a fun book or this is cute, this is funny. And then you're like, oh, actually, maybe not. So I think it's also a sign of good writing. But I also like you can tell why it hasn't been published or like picked up by a big company.
It definitely needs to go through some edits because the writing itself sometimes leaves room for more to be desired. It and she like sometimes contradicts herself with facts, but it's self-published entirely by her, and so it's to be expected for them to be have issues. But that being
It's also I think the biggest self-published book I've seen.
oh,
Like
for sure.
not biggest like size, but like most popular self-published book I've seen.
Mhm.
Which is why it's a little surprising that it hasn't been picked up, in my opinion.
I think she doesn't want it to be picked up. I think that's her whole thing.
Okay. See, I'm not like actively in this fandom. I don't know. I don't on any social media. Haven't read any of the excess stuff that she's written. I don't actually know. I've read the books and that was it.
Well, she doesn't actually really like to talk about All for the Game so much anymore. Like she'll still answer some people's like ask on Twitter, like, "Oh, what are the characters up today?" But there's a point in time when an author needs to step back from her work, and or she'll just say stuff, and I'm like, "That's not true. That doesn't happen. I refuse to acknowledge this," which is part of my fandomy thinking, and also just there's a point where the author has to realize that the characters take on a life of their own within her thoughts and within the fandom and the people who receive her characters. And I feel like sometimes she's like, no, this is a set way. Nothing else changes.
I don't like there's literally only one author that I actively follow on social media and it's Maggie Stiefvater. I think that's how you say it. It's the Raven Cycle. We're gonna go into that later. Don't worry, friends.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. Um, she's the only one I follow because she doesn't do that very often. She doesn't. She sometimes answers questions, but mostly with stuff that she's already written.
Mm-hmm.
There's another series, like a spin-off series coming out. So she mostly answers questions with that series, or like pieces from that series. So I'll leave that there until we talk about it later. But
I don't particularly
Yeah.
follow her, but because I'm in the fandom and I'm on Tumblr and I'm writing fan fiction and I'm doing this whole Big Bang thing recently, which takes up a lot of time. If you ever think about doing a Big Bang, which is basically where a whole bunch of authors come together with artists and the author writes a story and they get paired with the artist who makes art of the story, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, especially if you make it a lot of work like I kind of did. I'm writing this giant story that I didn't need to. But I digress. I forgot where I started.
we were talking about the author and like what she has to say about it.
Oh, I remember now. I was saying that I don't follow her because I'm in the fandom. I hear what she says, but personally, I've stopped listening to her or even seeking out what she says. Sometimes I'll go read her extra content to see like, oh, this is kind of what I imagined them after life or life after the books. And that's neat to read because In my opinion, the series ends a little bit too soon from what I would like.
I do. Obviously, I've only read the books the one time, and I do recall being a little disappointed about the ending. I think it just didn't solve everything the way I wanted it to.
Yeah, it definitely needed an epilogue that wasn't there at all.
Agreed.
But I think I think part of that was that she was thinking about writing a fourth book, but she never did. She's like, I feel it's complete. But I'm like, I need an epilogue.
See, if she had gone with a big company, they would have said you need an epilogue.
Yeah.
Fun fact. For all you Harry Potter fans out there, the fifth Harry Potter book was largely unedited by the company because J.K. Rowling refused to cut it down, which is why out of all the books it's the biggest. And the fifth book,
Order of the Phoenix?
Yes, Order of the Phoenix. You can take
Look at me knowing that. I don't even read Harry Potter.
Was why it's the biggest and why it has the most plot holes. I think there's like 2 or 3 things that aren't super well explained. And why it's like there's things that don't ever get talked about again in the series because the rest are like edited really well and that one's just like not. Which are things that I find interesting. I don't know if anyone else in the world does.
No, it is actually really interesting.
Your career in publishing.
It's interesting for me as a writer because I know I'm constantly trying to catch all my plot holes, which is why I send it to like 5 different people, just like, help. Does this make sense? Is this any good? So, people, get your stuff edited. Like, I know you have your pride and don't like people like saying how you should do things, but it helps so much. Because
no one's out there to actively like crush your dreams. They're just trying to make your book better.
They're just trying to help.
That being said, I edited one book and I like nearly died.
Well, to be fair, you edited a book written by history people who are notoriously bad writers.
Okay, I don't even think this man had a degree in history. I think he's just like a history buff. And it's a book of historical poetry on one specific area in California, which is not a very interesting area. But my name's on the cover.
It is.
Yep. I hope no one ever reads it. Yeah, it was a bad book.
We're off topic again.
Yeah. What were we talking about? Oh, editing, self-publishing. Good book series, all for the game. I think the second one is my favorite. Yeah, I think the second one's my favorite.
I think the third one's my favorite. Or at least the first half of the third one, because that's where I feel a lot of the character development just peaks. It's a lot of building in the second book, but everything just crashes and intensifies in the third, which is why I read it the fastest of the series by far.
Oh, so there's like a lot going on by the end of it. So
there is.
You want to read it faster.
There's so much going on in those books.
Yeah.
You know, how about we talk characters? I feel like in this book, the characters are such a big part of it that they deserve being talked about. So I guess we should start, obviously, with Neil Jostin. Neil. Neil is a 5'3" ball of sass. And the books are told through his perspective, which is by far the best part of it. Because you get all his commentary that he doesn't say to the foxes.
And he's very paranoid.
He is, which once you read the books, you know why he's paranoid.
Yeah, but it also gives a lot of extra layer to the other characters that we learn about from Neil's perspective. So, like, in other books, I don't think it's first person, is it?
No.
No. So, let's go back to the Harry Potter example for a moment. In the Harry Potter books, it's told from Harry's perspective, right? Not first person, but you have a very limited gaze because Harry is the most unreliable narrator on the planet, right? The common theme. And when people like to have like super meta conversations about Harry Potter, it's always Harry's an unreliable narrator.
That's
also,
actually...
he's gay in Harry Potter, but never mind about that. So you always get only what Harry sees, and Harry is not the most observant person on the planet. Neil, on the other hand, is very, very, very observant.
Yes.
Always thinks that something is coming for him.
With good reason.
Yeah. For sure. So you get a lot of like, I don't know why they're doing this. This person is really weird, but they're doing this and they're doing it a lot. And I don't know why, because I don't understand how humans interact with each other when they're not trying to like hurt each other. So get a lot of that from Neil. I think it's a pretty interesting way to write a series.
It is, because you learn more than what normal people would see in another person. Because Neil is so doubting of any sort of kindness that comes his way. He thinks of alternative motives, why they might be doing this. You get a more realistic view because he looks at people when they think no one else is looking at him, which is why he builds such a dynamic relationship with this other character, Andrew Minyard, who... Oh, Andrew.
I feel like we're spoiling it.
I'm not gonna say what happens with Andrew. I'm just saying Andrew's a very dynamic character.
Also, he's the goalie, and in any sport, goalies are always the weird ones.
I'm not spoiling anything, but Andrew is a very dynamic character who is probably one of my favorites besides Neil, because he's just so interesting in how he develops throughout the books. And I mean, you read the first book or skimmed it again, and it's been a long time since you've read the series, but for me, going from the end of the series to going back to the beginning to how Andrew is, for those of you, this is not a spoiler, this is something you know right off the bat. Andrew's medicated on medicine for the entirety of the first book, and through most of the series he's medicated, and it creates this kind of sense of mania where he's just off the wall fucking crazy.
I also think she very purposely makes Andrew unlikable. I don't think he's a likable character until you start to learn why he is the way he is.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, well, all right.
Yeah, no, Andrew's a very in-your-face kind of character. You're just like, oh, wow, you're an asshole.
I also think he's the most unrealistic character in the entire series.
Agreed.
I was gonna say, am I throwing shade right now? Are you gonna be mad?
No, agreed. I completely agree. And I think it has to do with how Andrew's handled, and again, how she thinks of him post the series as well, which I think she didn't quite capture how I imagine Andrew, how I think a realistic Andrew works, if that makes any sense.
I guess the thing with these kind of series is that they don't have to be realistic, but this one is supposed to be like realistic fiction.
It's definitely contemporary.
Yeah, and it's just not.
Which, you take it with a grain of salt if you consider the actual plot of the book and like everything that happens. Nothing about it is realistic in the slightest form.
No.
But
that's like the only kind of thing I like. I'm just saying.
Oh no. I often hate realistic fiction books, but I really like the series because the characters are so dynamic. Like Andrew's this interesting character that you think he's one way, but he's a completely different way by the end of the book. And all the other characters are really likable and how they have depth to why they're the way they are.
Yeah, I like that.
My other favorite character is Matt, who is this like gentle giant, and he's like the sweetest person ever, and I love him, and I wish he got more book time than he did.
Trying to think who my favorite. No, Nikki's my favorite.
I love Nikki too.
Nikki is Andrew and his brother's cousin. Andrew has a twin brother.
Yeah, Aaron. And so Nikki's their cousin, his older cousin, who actually takes Aaron and Andrew in for reasons that I won't say. And so Nikki's a really likable character, even though he does a lot of questionable things when you think about it.
Oh yeah, no, he's morally ambiguous for the best of times. But he's the most outwardly likable character, I would say.
More than Matt?
Okay, not more than Matt. You're right.
Matt's definitely the most likable character. Nikki's a close second just because he's such a fun and vibrant character. Dan's pretty cool too. Dan's the captain of the Foxes, which is the team Neil goes to join, and Matt's girlfriend, and she's kind of cool. She's kind of like this badass female who doesn't take anyone's shit, which makes her cool.
Say, I think all of the female characters in the book are super strongly written. I don't think there's a single one where I'm just like, except maybe Neil's mom. Yeah.
She's not even really considered a character. She's a plot device.
Yeah.
Speaking of plot devices, though, I have thoughts about Rico and how he was handled because
We never finished the overview on purpose because I'm wary of spoilers with this series. But
yes,
Neil, part of who Neil's running from is a rival team, a rival XC team called the Ravens, on which there is a player named Rico. And Kevin used to play for them, and they purposely injured his hand so he could not play anymore. And no one thought Kevin would ever play again. But he went to the Foxes and he rehabilitated his hand so he could hold the stick, but with his other hand as his dominant hand. So he plays again. Is that a spoiler? That's a spoiler.
That's slightly a spoiler, but not like a big one because you learned that pretty early on.
Yeah.
Anyway. So yes, Neil's running from him because Rico also knew him as a child. Something happens between Rico, Neil, and Kevin when they're children that makes Neil very afraid of Kevin and Rico recognizing him because they can link him to the past he's running from. And so, of course, being this a teen series, Rico comes into the story and creates problems for Neil and Kevin. And I get that's as much of an overview I'm going to give you because anything more is getting into spoiler territory. Besides the fact that the whole series is going towards them trying to beat the Ravens in the XZ tournament.
So it's like, honestly, it's like Peaky Blinders meets the Stanley Cup final. That's how I would describe the last.
I've never seen Peaky Blinders, so I cannot confirm or deny this.
Everyone in the world should watch Peaky Blinders, even though I told you I haven't finished it. So.
But that's less of a mark against the show and just your own attention span.
Yeah, I have real problems with that in general. So I don't like, that's why I like to study poetry. It's short and I and every time I read it, it's different because like interpretation and shit. So poetry, man.
Versus I like a lot of character development and tying plots, which is why I enjoy books, and particularly long books.
Do not like long books. Unpopular opinion.
You know, most people don't like long books.
100% unpopular opinions within English majors.
No.
You're right, I like Shakespeare.
I wouldn't say you have unpopular opinions, even when it comes to preferring poetry over books. Most people do because they're shorter and easier to get through.
Poetry's great, everyone. I also feel like teen books, why I don't read them so much anymore, is because they're easy to read for sure, 110%, but I often can't relate to them anymore.
Yes, which is why I tend to read young adult books that are either fantasy because I can differentiate between, oh, you're like 19 years old, you don't know anything, to young adult that's more adult than young adult, if that makes any sense to anyone listening.
I also really, really like books that I can read because I work with kids, or I used to work with kids. So I used to like to read books that would help me relate to the kids in some way. So I like to read a lot of like the LGBT books that are coming up right now. It's like really popular because it would make it easier for me to connect to the kids that I worked with if I needed to, which I did, you know, sometimes. So plus I just think I'm chill all the time. So anyway, so I liked reading them. I like the realistic ones better than fantasy, but if they're too realistic, then it's like I'm too old for this and it's very obvious.
Yes. I often don't like, oh, I'm 16 years old. I'm like, I will second guess if I pick up the book. Because I'm just like, you don't really know anything. There's going to be a whole bunch of teen drama.
Like, wow, he kissed me. Oh, wow. What a life you live. And I used to love those. Those are like my favorite back in the day.
It's all about just growing up.
I think the more interesting stories are happening with people our age. I would love to read more like young adult fiction that's centered around like 22-year-olds. Like, I would kill to see a rom-com about like grad students, or like read a book about the transition from undergrad to graduate school, or something like that. I might write that. That might happen. It might be me.
Okay, but back to our original topic where I was saying about my issues and thoughts about Rico.
Yes.
So Rico's, for all intents and purposes, the villain of the story, or like one of the villains. And That's pretty much his entire character dynamic, which I feel is a pity because he could have been an extremely dynamic villain that has, I don't want to say justifiable measures because some of the stuff she's like says he does but isn't included explicitly in the canon makes him like kind of really really awful. But at the same time, it makes him sympathetic, I guess is a word. Rico, yes.
Sympathetic?
I don't know if that's quite the word I'm going for, but okay. Here's a comparison I can make it to. You've read The Kite Runner, right?
No.
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 Okay, so in The Kite Runner, for people like you who haven't read it, the main character, Amir, I believe his name is, makes a very questionable, downright awful decision in terms of sacrificing his childhood friend for his own gain. And it leads to like some awful consequences. But it's in the fact that he does it because he's so hell-bent on getting this approval that he's never had and craves. You know how, like, when children don't get the attention they need, they act out? That's what Rico is. And at a point, it's kind of sad. Because, like I said, it can be such a dynamic and kind of heartfelt, or heartbreaking, that's a better word, backstory that we just don't get, or we don't get explored, I should say.
Yeah, because I think it's really implied.
It's implied, and it's like exploited. Like Neil definitely targets him for some of the stuff he says that goes towards that backstory. But again, he's, for all intents and purposes, the villain to move the plot along, or the villain to inflict damage upon these characters.
He's the Death Eaters to the Lord Voldemort that's sort of off screen at this point.
Yes.
That makes sense.
That is actually a very good comparison.
I'm pretty sure it's always going to come back to Harry Potter.
But no, it makes me sad because I like dynamic villains. I really, really do. Which is why, at first, I didn't care about Rico. In fact, I hated him. I still kind of hate him. But the more I read the story and the more I think about these characters, there's a lot of missed opportunities. Like, there's one character that something happens to within the first part of the series, and it feels like he was just a completely pointless character, except as a plot device.
We're talking about Jean?
No.
I don't know who we're talking about.
Seth.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that was a plot device.
Exactly.
He's annoying. So I'm not mad about that.
But if you think about it, all the foxes are annoying at some level.
I don't think Dan is ever annoying.
I love Dan. Okay, Matt's not annoying. Matt can do no wrong. Okay, Matt's precious and deserves everything in this world.
I mean, Nikki's kind of annoying.
Nikki's a little bit annoying. Flamboyant is his personality, and it's great.
Honestly, I wouldn't even... I don't know. Flamboyant implies that he relies a lot on his sexuality for his personality, but I think he's just out there on his own.
I think Nikki's also another very interesting character because of what happens in his backstory that adds to it, which is why I call him flamboyant, because he takes his sexuality, which had been discriminated against, and uses it just like, you know what, fuck you, it's this.
I would say he is the definition of
yes,
of his sexuality. Happy belated Pride Month, everyone!
Yay!
Have a Nikki. What else? Who else should we talk about? I think we've covered the most important people. At least for the first book. So the Foxes, what's important about the Foxes is worst of their school for their sport, if that makes sense. And the coach purposely takes players who have had like really messed up lives and who wouldn't have gotten a scholarship at any other school and puts them on his team.
Yeah, he basically creates a team of second chances or third chances or whatever to people from broken homes, and which is why Neil gets picked, because he is perceived as being from a broken home.
Which is true. I mean, but his home is more like non-existent.
Yes.
Point. But they don't know that.
No. Wymack the coach, Definitely takes in more than he thought he was gonna get what he takes Neil
Oh yeah.
in. They all do.
Understatement.
They all get so much more than they thought.
Yeah.
And that's because Neil's a pathological liar, and which adds another layer to his narration, because you see the lies and then you see the truth, and it's fun to see how all the characters have to catch up to the truth that we know all this time.
It's exciting. It's a good book. Everyone should read it.
It really is. And good thing about it, the first book's free on Amazon right now, and the rest of the books are $1. So you're spending $2 for 3 really, really good books.
And fast books too.
And
Like, if I
fast.
can read it, anyone can read it.
Yeah, no, you can definitely read them all in a couple days, or maybe a week if you're stretching it out and you're reading
Or
here
a
to here.
6-hour plane ride to New York City. If you're
But-
ambitious.
But no, I really, really hold these books dear to my heart, because they're the cast of characters, it leaves such an impression on you when you end it that you get the worst book hangover, at least in my opinion.
I don't know about that. I don't think I agree with that. The worst book hangover I've ever had was Call Me By. Actually, Harry Potter, but that doesn't count. But that's also just in recent memory. I also think The Raven Boys, or The Raven Cycle, rather, book hangover, because the ending wasn't great.
The ending wasn't great, but I felt like the Raven Boys had a more complete ending than All for the Game
Yeah.
does,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
why I had a book hangover, because I'm like, this is not finished. I need something more to finish this, which is why I ended up reading a whole bunch of fan fiction straight away after I read it, which is a good and bad thing, because then you like mix everything up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the worst thing about fan fiction is after a while you can't remember and what's not.
Yeah, and then you start having opinions about characters that have nothing to do with what's actually in the books,
Yeah.
which is my issue with it. But I also really, really like it because I felt the series wasn't complete, and I feel like the fandom sometimes does a really good job of having that completed feel.
Yeah. I've not read any fan fiction for All for the Game, but I understand where you're coming from. At least I don't think I've read any fan fiction. I can't remember any. So, but I often read fan fiction for fandoms I'm not a part of,
Which I find the weirdest thing.
but I'm also not really a part of any fandom, I'd say. Unless like sports counts as a fandom. And then I guess I'm pretty solidly in Check Please fandom. We'll get there too. That's coming. Oh man, that one was a big surprise. Damn it. Yeah, I don't have a fandom. Do I? You're giving me a skeptical look.
No,
Do have
I was just thinking.
I have a blog like on Tumblr, which none of you will ever. But it's not nothing. It's like, you know, some people have like blogs about one thing. Mine's not. It has a lot of hockey right now, but also just like cat and dresses and bands and the odd show here or there. And if you go back far enough, you can see all the phases of my life. Started out as a band blog, and changed. I'm just not like I don't think I'm a one fandom person.
Oh, no,
Also,
no.
like, fandom in itself, I find it a little toxic sometimes because there's always some form of discourse. And I'm just like, why waste your time being mad about something that isn't real? But then I realize that the entire like community is just like fandom and discourse. Being mad about something that isn't real. But what else do you want to say about it? I think
I think
we've
I
covered
think
a
at
lot.
this point we've covered everything we needed to say about this series. But I feel like before we close, we definitely need to have some trigger warnings for people who are thinking of reading this. Sadly, there is reference to childhood abuse, graphic depictions of violence, and unfortunately, rape. Rape does occur within these books. Even though it is not,
drug abuse.
drug abuse is also a thing. I forget about that. That's not as huge of a thing, but it's definitely there. The rape is probably the biggest thing, and for those of you who are just like, oh, I can't do it, it's not explicit, but it is a very emotional scene. The rape itself isn't explicit. The aftermath of it is explicit. But she doesn't actually describe the rape occurring.
I would tread carefully no matter what.
Yes.
I remember distinctly being on the plane reading that and being like, holy shit. Was not expecting that. There's some sexual content, I would say.
Yes, there's
I don't
definitely
know.
sexual content.
Um, what else?
There's definitely depictions of like mistreatment in a medical facility.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Um, just
Like
unjust
depression.
laws, depression,
Like
suicidal tendencies or thoughts.
just mishandling of a lot of mental health.
Mm-hmm. A lot of mental health discrimination and just misdiagnosis.
Mm-hmm. I
But
think we might have covered everything.
I think that's all that you need to be warned about. But don't let it discourage you from reading these books. I guarantee you that you will love them. They're so good. The characters are very likable and somewhat relatable. And with if you have gone through a tough time in your
Yeah.
life, there's the foxes are definitely a picture of that and saying that you can overcome it.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, for sure. Also, there's just some really good sports action. If you like some sports,
It
do
is
that.
actually really good. The sports scenes, and this is coming from someone who doesn't really like reading sports literature. I really liked how they handled incorporating the sport with the plot because it fits very well, and they're not excessively long or even excessively boring. They fit
Oh,
very
I would
well
say.
with the story.
I really like sports, and I was really into it, and it's an imaginary sport. So
That you don't even really understand. Like, I'm not quite sure how Xe works. Like, I have an
it makes
idea,
more sense if you understand the sports that it's based off of. So it makes a little more sense to me, I think.
but even if you don't know the sports, it's still enjoyable and you can follow along to the
Yeah.
best of your abilities.
It's genuinely a pretty well written series. And it's good. It is. Despite all the warnings we had to give. I think we
Yes.
spent like what, 5 minutes on warnings.
Yeah. It's there's warnings, but it's worth it. Like 100% worth it.
Mhm.
But I think that's all the time we have for you guys this week.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else we have to say about it. What are we doing next week?
Next week we are reading
Oh, I know what it is.
drumroll please. We are reading This Side of Paradise by Scott Fitzgerald.
And Scott Fitzgerald, This Side of Paradise. Is that the one?
Mm-hmm.
I bought
So
it in New York. That's why I have it. That's why I wanted to read it.
I still have to go get it. But I really like Fitzgerald. I really like Great Gatsby, and I've read a couple of his like other things, but not like fully through. So I'm definitely looking forward to reading more of his work.
Big into Gatsby. I think I've read a couple short stories. Maybe. I might be wrong. Don't.
But that's all the time we have for you guys. You got a little sneak peek on what we think, and we'll go into further detail of how we like or dislike The Side of Paradise.
It's gonna be an adventure. This is the first one that we both haven't. So
So we'll see you guys next week. Bye!
bye.